Welcome to Crossroads. I'm your host, Joshua Phillip, and today we have Robert Enlaw, president of EdChoice, and formerly the Friedman administration. He's here to talk to us about education choice and Milton Friedman. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So tell us first off about some of the work you do and why you do it.
So we were started by Milton Friedman, the Nobel laureate economist. We were called the Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice, and he had a really simple idea. He said it was fairer, it's more equitable, and it's more effective to separate the government financing of education from the government running of schools, right? So the taxpayer dollars that we collect should go to parents to go to whatever school they want, whether that's public, private, charter, we just don't care. The goal is to give parents the freedom to choose, families the freedom to have opportunity. So that's what EdChoice now does. Our goal is to advance that because we believe that when you advance universal educational opportunity, families will have success in life and we will have a stronger society. As an organization, we do three things, right? You've got to make sure you know how choice is being used by families. So we research this issue. We are the nation's leading researchers on what happens when parents choose. We do training and outreach. People got to know what it's about, right? People have to understand what educational opportunity is and what it means when you're confined to assigned schools in areas that don't work for you. Imagine you're a family in suburban state X, right? Let's call it suburban New York, right? Up in Rye, New York. But your child is being bullied and you just can't quite afford to go to a private school or to another school. What are you supposed to do? And the idea of family opportunity and family choice is to let families in all areas have opportunities. And the third thing we do is we do advocacy to make sure these policies get passed around the country.
And of course, there's a big discussion right now that we've seen that the public school system doesn't seem to be working very well, especially when you get into Common Core and trying to standardize educations across the board. And you know, kids they get 15 minutes of recess and they line up for a slide and go down and then go back to class and they can't talk to the person sitting next to them. And
so this idea that a one-size-fits-all system is the way America should run itself and its educational delivery mechanisms is just silly. It's not worked and it hasn't worked. And maybe it worked when we had 150,000 school districts, but now we only have about 13,500 or so, and for a population that's easily twice as large. When you centralize like that, when you basically make it a top-down driven system instead of a bottom-up system, it's not possible that it can work. Even if they're great teachers, and even if they're great administrators, you just can't have a monopoly that's going to actually provide a good service. Now that's why 47% of all fourth graders can't read. Let me repeat that on grade level. 47% of all fourth graders can't read on grade level. Our job is to make sure parents can move to schools that work best for them.
Interesting. And now it's a funny situation where if you talk to a lot of people who believe in government control and you know the government is our greatest protector type people, they talk about education as being one of the core issues they care about. But what I think they fail to understand is that the government intervention, or it's not intervention because you're talking about financing, but the government control of the education, industry, I guess we could call it, is just not working very well. And as you mentioned, it's mostly because it does create monopoly, and it is a monopoly.
So this idea of public education in America is actually an important value, but that's not the same thing as state-run schools. Right? We have confused two very important issues, right? As a country, we believe that we should have an educated citizenry, that we should have public education. That is not the same thing as a state-run or locally run government school. So our goal is to say, let's recognize that as a country, we need to have an educated citizenry that can do the basics of arithmetic and that can have diversity of delivery mechanisms, but not force them to go to every single public school, publicly funded, government-run school. Right? And so it's a big issue. And this is why the federal government is now finally stepping in a positive way with something called the Education Freedom Scholarship Act, which will allow individuals and corporations to get a federal tax credit for gifts they make to states that will allow for more opportunities for families.
And I know that in some states it's getting pretty dicey. Like
yeah.
in New York City, for example, they're talking now about having the State Board of Education controlling even private schools.
Right.
And so even private schools are no longer independent of whatever the state wants to push out through centralization.
Yeah, and this is a real weird turning point, crossroads, if you were, around this education issue. Because, look, what is the proper role of government in education going forward? That actually was Milton Friedman's original discussion in 1955. And the answer is the proper role of government is to basically fund education through the taxes it collects and then let parents choose. because we don't do that in any other industry. Name me an industry where even if you get a Pell Grant, do you tell them which school to go to? No. Right? Families have the opportunity to choose. And so we have to understand that families need these freedoms and that we have to have multiple delivery mechanisms. And we haven't even thought about it yet. Think about microschooling, think about homeschooling, think about all the things you could do if you empowered families to choose.
Yeah, and it's a bizarre situation where I think I don't know what grounds people are defending state control of education on, because they're talking about quality of education. Well, it's honestly, I don't think you can get much lower quality than the public schools at this point. If you're talking about, making sure kids are going to be functioning members of society, I don't think you can have a worse system than the public school system.
That's right.
If you're talking about, really quality education, then you're starting to talk about public or private schools. But when you talk, and they say, oh, well, what about the kids who can't afford private schools? You're like, well, really, the amount of money the state pays per student in public schools is about the same.
Oh, so it's even higher, right? So let's take a clear look at this. Nationally, the average amount for a child in public education for federal, state, and local dollars is about $14,000. K-8 nationally for private schools is an average of $5,000 to $7,000. The states save money when they offer scholarship programs, and it just makes sense, right? So if you're going to give someone a voucher or a scholarship or an education savings account for $8,000 and you're spending $14,000, then you're going to make a savings, and so it's a more effective use of our dollars. It's the argument about government control in education is a really challenging one, because we want to make sure we have an educated populace, right? But on the other hand, what made us think that the state should be the one to deliver that? I mean, I think about in the 60s when Kennedy says, we're going to go to the moon in the next decade. All right, so they put a lot of government money behind that. But what did they do when they did that? They gave it to every single private company to do the best thing they could do. All they did was organize the delivery of a program to go to space. In the same way, what we're saying is there should be the freedom of all these companies to come in and innovate in a way we haven't had before.
Great. And so where can people learn more about your organization?
Great. So EdChoice is edchoice.org. It's a really simple one, edchoice.org. We are considered the nation's leading school choice group in the country, and actually we're starting to do things across the world now. So we've been working, I don't know if you know this, but the UN is considering an anti-school choice resolution right now. Right, and so we've been over at the UN trying to combat this with our friends at OIDEL and trying to help them understand that what the UN is trying to say is, well, you can't go to private schools unless you first try public. So it's a ridiculous way of saying that we don't want anyone to have the freedom to choose. So this is an international issue, and we're an organization that's trying to support both national and international issues around that.
Great, yeah, great work, and
thanks very
pleasure
much.
having you on the show. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Josh. Appreciate it.
Great. Everyone, please remember to like and subscribe. See you next time.